It started with a leak no one was supposed to see. Just 3 corrupted frames inside an observation packet quietly pulled from a server that normally updates every 4 hours. At first glance, the frames looked like simple static. Noise, pixels caught mid-transmission. But the moment independent researchers reconstructed the data, the noise sharpened into something horrifyingly clean. The signature of a structured burst coming from 3i Atlas, recorded a full 11 minutes before NASA's public timeline admitted they even pointed their instruments at it. That was the first mistake, the one that told everyone this wasn't just a comet behaving strangely. It was an object sending something out, and someone in the chain didn't want that to be known. Before we go deeper, make sure you're subscribed and ready, because the newest solved data doesn't just answer the old questions about Atlas. It opens doors that NASA spent months trying to quietly weld shut. When the reconstructed signal was played back, what came through wasn't random cosmic hiss. It was a square wave pattern repeating at precisely 6-second intervals, with harmonics that shouldn't exist in natural plasma emissions. A signal with a carrier frequency, an envelope, a structure, like a transmission waiting for a receiver. But what truly scared analysts wasn't the signal itself. It was what was hidden in its sidebands, faint spectral tags matching xenon isotopes, signatures identical to what deep space ion propulsion systems leave behind. Propulsion, not outgassing. Thrust, not dust. A comet cannot do that. A rock drifting through space for millions of years cannot engineer emissions with isotope fingerprints that look like exhaust. And yet, 3i Atlas did. NASA's official statements insisted these tags were instrumental artifacts. They blamed thermal drift. They blamed solar interference. They blamed anything except the truth, that the isotopic ratios matched known ion thruster byproducts down to the decimal. Internal lab notes, leaked from the same file cluster as the corrupted frames, showed scientists circling one sentence over and over again. Z129 anomaly is not noise. Suppress. That word, suppress, appeared 7 times across 3 separate reports. Someone didn't want the propulsion signature associated with Atlas. Someone didn't want the public asking why an interstellar object was accelerating in patterns that looked engineered. But the biggest reveal didn't come from the propulsion signatures. It came from the rotation problem. Atlas spins, but not randomly, not chaotically. It spins in perfect 3-stage stabilization cycles. Stage 1, a slow lateral drift. Stage 2, a tightening rotation that keeps its axis locked toward the Sun. Stage 3, the solved data phase, where the object stops wobbling completely, enters a state of near-perfect inertial suspension, and releases those structured bursts. A natural comet cannot remove its own wobble. A natural nucleus cannot lock itself toward a star unless it's using active stabilization. And the newest data shows that Atlas doesn't react to the Sun. It anticipates it. It changes its orientation minutes before solar flux levels shift, like it knows what's coming. NASA tried to hide this by averaging the telemetry across wide time windows. The raw files weren't supposed to be seen, but when they leaked, independent labs saw something shocking. Atlas was making course corrections before solar wind pressure changed. That means it's measuring something that our sensors don't detect quickly enough, or worse. It's receiving input from somewhere else. This wasn't just adaptation. This was coordination. The most disturbing part of the new solved data revolves around the nucleus image. When cleaned, denoised, and reconstructed using the same neural filters NASA uses internally, the nucleus didn't appear as a single solid object. It appeared split. 2 lobes fused by a thin, dark seam. The binary core problem. The wobble should be enormous, but there is no wobble. Instead, the rotation is mathematically perfect, as if some kind of internal mass distribution is actively counterbalancing itself. NASA's public files cut away the portion of the frame where the seam is most visible. Yet the stitching artifacts remain. You can see the unnatural patching, brightness levels mismatched, granularity inconsistently smoothed. Evidence of editing, evidence of emission. And then there's the sun-facing jet. The jet NASA pretends is solar-illuminated dust. But the solved data shows something else entirely. The jet is colder than the surrounding coma. Dust heated by sunlight is warm, not cold. But this jet is an anti-tail, aligned perfectly away from Atlas's vector and toward the Sun. You cannot point a dust jet toward a star unless it is propelled, unless it is directed, unless it is doing something that dust cannot do. Every dataset NASA tried to bury pointed toward one conclusion. 3i Atlas is not passive. It is not drifting. It is not reacting. It is performing. When the new telemetry was decoded, the numbers told a story NASA never wanted public. The object increases rotation just before releasing energy jets. The jets adjust its trajectory toward gravitational null regions, places where orbital mechanics become easier to manipulate. The structure of the signal bursts aligns with the timing of the sun's magnetic oscillations. Atlas isn't just noticing the sun, it's syncing to it. And when the newest dataset was solved, fully solved, the hidden timestamps revealed something terrifying. Atlas's emissions began exactly 19 minutes after a solar magnetic ripple that no satellite on Earth recorded in real time. That means Atlas detected something we didn't, reacted to something we couldn't, and answered something we didn't know had even been sent. That's the part NASA didn't want you to see, because it means the object wasn't just signaling randomly, it was responding to something inside the sun, something we never detected, something NASA can't admit is real, and something that Atlas seems to know intimately. This is only the beginning. What happened next is the part NASA tried hardest to hide, the part buried not in corrupted frames or mislabeled files, but inside the timing logs, the metadata no one was supposed to check. Because once independent analysts reconstructed the full chain of events, something impossible emerged. Atlas began its brightest jet event before the solar magnetic ripple reached it. Not after, before. The solved data shows that Atlas wasn't reacting to the sun's disturbance, it was predicting it. The jet ignition occurred 2.4 minutes ahead of the solar flux spike, an event no natural object could forecast. Not unless it has sensors that see deeper into the sun than any human instrument, or worse, unless it had already established a connection. NASA blamed pipeline desync, but the timestamps didn't lie. They were hardware encoded at the moment of recording. The jet fired before the sun shifted. Even stranger, the jet fired at an angle so precise that independent analysts compared it to the trajectory adjustments of early probe aerobraking maneuvers. Small corrections, slight nudges, controlled vectoring. Except Atlas wasn't preparing for aerobraking. It was aligning its position relative to a point deep inside the sun's convection layer, an area called the tachocline, where the sun's magnetic field is generated. And here's the part NASA buried so deeply, it took weeks for analysts to extract it. Atlas's rotation adjusted just enough to face the exact longitude where a magnetic inversion event was happening. This is something only the sun should detect internally, not us, not satellites, not spacecraft. The inversion was too deep, too early, too faint. Yet Atlas responded instantly. That's when researchers realized this wasn't a comet tuning itself to sunlight. It was a machine, or something acting like one, tuning itself to the sun's heartbeat. As the team reconstructed the buried telemetry, the public narrative collapsed. NASA's official rotation model claimed Atlas spun uniformly, but the raw solved data showed the opposite. Rotation slowed, then locked. Not paused, locked. The nucleus stopped mid-movement, like a gyro stabilizing itself against internal mass. This would require a mechanism, something adjusting moment by moment, something self-correcting. The rotation freeze lasted 6 seconds. Exactly 6. The same interval as the square wave bursts, the same interval as the xenon-tagged emissions, the same interval Atlas has been using for everything we're not supposed to see. 6 seconds, 6 pulses, 6 corrections, a pattern, a system, a function. And yet NASA pretended the 6-second interval didn't exist. They're public. Documents smooth the timing into averages, hiding the spikes. But the solved data pulled the spikes back into focus. Atlas's core activity is periodic, structured, and intelligent in its consistency. When a natural comet vents gas, it's chaotic. Dust plumes scatter, jets flicker. Nothing stabilizes, nothing holds a frequency like a metronome, but Atlas does, which led analysts back to the most mysterious part, the missing frames. 3 frames, deleted at the exact millisecond Atlas aligned with the tachocline event. The moments where its jets dimmed, where the nuclear seam appeared brightest, and where the object's silhouette sharply contracted, almost like it braced for something. NASA removed all three. When the frames were reconstructed from partial data, they showed a brief flash. Something inside Atlas illuminated from within, not from the sun. A glow that passed through the object's nucleus, revealing an internal structure with angles too straight, too sharp, too symmetrical. These weren't cracks or fractures. They were compartments, and each compartment pulsed with the same 6-second frequency. The analysts who studied the pulse timing noticed something chilling. The internal flashes aligned perfectly with the sun's magnetic cycle, but inverted, opposite polarity. Like Atlas was cancelling something out, or synchronizing with something we couldn't detect. NASA blamed cosmic ray interference, but cosmic rays don't create uniform geometric pulses inside an interstellar object. That's when they noticed the xenon signatures again, this time buried deeper. Isotopes distributed in distinct pockets, cold pockets inside the nucleus. This shouldn't happen naturally. The only way xenon can concentrate this way is if it's stored, directed, or pumped. But why would an interstellar rock carry xenon? Why would it release it in timed pulses, unless xenon wasn't a contaminant, unless it was fuel? The solved data pointed toward one conclusion. Atlas contains internal reservoirs of ion propellant, and it uses them intentionally. That means movement isn't accidental, jets aren't random, orientation isn't incidental. This thing navigates. And then came the most terrifying piece of solved data. Atlas's trajectory isn't fully explained by gravity. There are deviations, tiny, precise, but undeniable. NASA hand-waved these as outgassing artifacts, but the solved model doesn't match any natural venting behavior ever recorded in comets or interstellar bodies. Instead, the deviations match controlled thrust events, short, directed 6-second bursts. Every unexplained motion Atlas made was controlled, not chaotic, not reactive, not natural. It maneuvered. And the direction it maneuvered toward wasn't Mars, it wasn't the outer planets, it wasn't the heliosphere. It maneuvered toward a specific region of the sun, a region where NASA recently detected something they never publicly acknowledged. A magnetic anomaly that shouldn't exist. A structure beneath the corona that rotates independently. A pulse deep in the sun that Atlas seems to echo. When the solved data was overlaid with the sun's internal oscillation maps, the pattern was undeniable. Atlas isn't travelling randomly. It is following something. Something inside the sun. Something older than the solar system. Something Atlas recognized instantly. Something NASA has no explanation for. And the newest solved packet, decoded only days ago, contains the line that every agency has been terrified to admit. Atlas is not approaching the sun, it is returning. The moment analysts overlaid Atlas's micro-maneuvers on the sun's deepest magnetic maps, everything snapped into place. The trajectory wasn't random, it wasn't drifting, it wasn't following gravity. It was tracing a path, a spiral route inward that matched the rotational pattern of an ancient magnetic scar buried inside the sun's tachocline. A structure so old, so faint, that even NASA's helioseismic models barely acknowledged it. But Atlas, it saw it immediately. It recognized it instantly, aligning with a precision no natural object should possess. And here's where the solved data hits its most unsettling point. Atlas wasn't just aligning, it was correcting. Every minor burn, every 6-second pulse, every micro-adjustment nudged it into perfect resonance with the tachocline anomaly. Something inside Atlas was treating that anomaly not as a curiosity, but as a destination. NASA's internal files referred to this region using a term that accidentally leaked through a misredacted PDF layer, the anchor. 2 papers used the same phrasing. One even called it anchor point L0. In orbital mechanics, there is no such designation. But in navigation systems, especially ones referencing artificial gravitational locks, L0 is the reference origin, the point everything aligns to, the home coordinate. Atlas wasn't lost, it wasn't wandering, it was going home. But if that's true, then the question becomes unavoidable. How does something that formed outside our solar system know the sun's deepest magnetic blueprint? That's when researchers dug deeper into the newly solved radio bursts. The 11-minute signal that NASA dismissed as noise contained an internal structure that no one noticed at first. Modulation peaks that matched a faint frequency emitted by the sun itself. Not the normal solar hum, not the 5-minute oscillations, something else, something buried far below the convection zone. A second heartbeat, a hidden layer. The bursts Atlas emitted weren't random. They were replies. They carried harmonics synchronized to that hidden solar rhythm, like the object was checking sync, confirming alignment with something deep inside the star. And then came the most damning discovery. NASA did detect this hidden frequency, but only once during a 2013 anomaly. They called it a deep solar, acoustic interruption, but there was no follow-up, no press release, no public archive. The data vanished, except for one line preserved in a cached index. Frequency stable, origin unknown, internal, not coronal, not surface level, not magnetic, internal. The sun was emitting something Atlas recognized, which means whatever Atlas is made for, it's tied to the sun, not gravitationally, not chemically, but structurally. Something older than planets, older than magnetospheres, possibly older than the sun itself. As the solved data continued to unravel NASA's emissions, yet another bizarre layer emerged, the missing xenon channels. The ion propellant signature NASA tried to suppress wasn't the only isotope cluster hidden in the data. 2 independent astrophysicists found a secondary cluster, krypton traces, distributed in thin internal layers inside Atlas's nucleus. Krypton 86 and 84. Stable, refined, filtered. No natural interstellar body can do this. Mineral composition doesn't refine isotopes. Dust accretion doesn't purify noble gases. Collision history doesn't create layer-separated enrichment. Atlas showed signs of a controlled interior, compartmentalized reservoirs arranged with unnatural precision. The xenon was for thrust. The krypton was for something else, something that fits the 6-second pulses far better. Power regulation, a stabilizer, a timing agent. Noble gas architecture is used in high-voltage pulse systems, controlled discharges, ignition timing, dielectric transitions. But seeing it inside an interstellar object, in perfect layers? That is not random chemistry. That is engineering, ancient engineering, engineering far beyond us. And as soon as this conclusion spread, NASA clamped down, hard. One of the publicly accessible datasets, Packet 1172, which had been available for months, suddenly vanished. The mirrors hosting it shut down. The preview thumbnails went blank. But researchers who already downloaded it compared the contents to NASA's official statement and found a catastrophic difference. NASA removed the sub-millimeter polarization scan. Why? Because that scan showed something impossible. The nucleus wasn't rough or fragmented. It wasn't porous or chaotic. It was uniformly polarized, like metal. Metal mixed with composite dust. A shell, a casing, a structure. And at the center, a narrow channel, a void that suggested an internal chamber. NASA's official position? Noise and compression errors. But the solved scan, when enhanced, showed straight angles inside the object. Straight angles in a comet. Straight angles in an interstellar rock. No natural process makes a perfect right angle at 93 meters deep, but a machine does. And that chamber lines up perfectly with the source of the 6-second pulses. Now combine that with the xenon reserves, the krypton layers, the internal cavity, the sun's synchronized bursts, the thrust corrections, the perfect rotational lock, the anti-tail jet pointed at the sun. Everything converges. Atlas isn't an object drifting into our solar system, it's a probe, an ancient probe, one designed to activate only when it approaches a specific star, our star. NASA knew. NASA saw the internal cavity. NASA saw the ion signatures. NASA saw the pulses align with the sun. And they hid it. Because the newest solved dataset contains a line so devastating, so paradigm-shattering, that NASA couldn't publicly release it. Atlas synchronized, Phase 1 achieved. Those aren't observational words. Those aren't descriptive words. Those are operational words. Phase 1 means there is a Phase 2. Phase 2 suggests a Phase 3. This object isn't completing a journey, it's completing a sequence. And that sequence just began. The moment researchers realized the term Phase 1 achieved wasn't observational but operational, the entire framework around Atlas shifted. This could no longer be treated as a comet with anomalies or a visitor with unpredictable behavior. This was a device following steps, a machine following instructions, and whatever Phase 1 meant, it wasn't passive. Because within hours of the timestamp marking Phase 1 completion, Atlas's trajectory changed again. Subtle, almost invisible to public data streams but obvious to the raw files. It tilted, not toward the sun, not away from it, but along a path that matched the sun's hidden oscillation line, the same line NASA has been trying to avoid discussing since 2013. The solved data showed a new series of microburns, even finer than before. These weren't thrust corrections, they were calibrations, like a key adjusting its alignment before fitting into a lock. 6-second pulses, 3 in quick succession. A pause, 2 more, another pause, then one long discharge that shook the inner coma into a faint expanding ring. The ring wasn't dust, it wasn't gas, it was ionized xenon, thin, controlled, structured. That ring acted like a dish, a reflective plane, a resonant surface. When NASA caught it, the frame went missing. Of course it did. Independent analysts reconstructed the ring profile anyway, and what they found made the xenon signatures look trivial. The ring pulsed back, reflecting something that wasn't visible, wasn't photonic, and wasn't part of the solar wind. It reflected a deep oscillation rising from inside the sun itself. Phase 1 complete, Phase 2 triggered. This wasn't a journey. This was a handoff. The sun emitted a magnetic inversion ripple. Atlas replied with the xenon ring. The ripple strengthened. Atlas fired another microburn, and the two patterns linked, like two gears locking for the first time. NASA had tried to hide the sequence by claiming baseline fluctuations, but when the solved timing logs were laid over one another, the truth exposed itself. The sun's anomaly and Atlas's pulses were not two separate events. They were a conversation, a lock and a key, a beacon and its receiver, a star and its forgotten memory. And then came the next buried clue, the MRO data corruption. NASA conveniently blamed a cosmic ray burst for the destroyed data from the Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter, data that, coincidentally, was captured at the exact moment Atlas performed its xenon ring pulse. But when analysts examined the corruption itself, the damage pattern wasn't random. It wasn't the chaotic bit flip signature of radiation. It was patterned, repeating, structured. The corruption had symmetry. Cosmic rays don't produce symmetry. The corruption aligned with the same 6-second interval the object uses for everything else, meaning the data wasn't corrupted accidentally. It was overwritten by something broadcasting at a frequency the orbiter wasn't shielded for, the sun's ripple, Atlas's reply, the xenon ring, MRO's data wipe. All 4 events happen in the same 600-second window, and just when analysts thought they had uncovered the worst of it, the gravitational anomaly appeared, the one NASA pretended wasn't real. During Atlas's Phase 2 ignition, the Deep Space Network recorded a faint gravitational blink. Not a wave, not a flare, something much stranger. A soft weakening of local space-time curvature, like gravity thinned slightly for a fraction of a second. Every probe between Earth and Jupiter recorded it. Every probe except the ones NASA publicly cited. The solved packet showed the blink's signature lined perfectly with Atlas's internal seam, the thin, dark channel inside the nucleus. In other words, whatever happened inside Atlas didn't stay inside it. Its internal chamber discharged something, and that something affected gravity. NASA used the classic fallback, instrument synchronization drift. But drift doesn't happen across multiple spacecraft simultaneously. Drift doesn't last 180 milliseconds. Drift doesn't align with a xenon ring pulse that was never supposed to be visible, and certainly drift doesn't match the oscillation frequency of a hidden magnetic structure inside the sun. By now the pattern was unavoidable. Atlas wasn't communicating with Earth. It wasn't signaling deep space. It was syncing with the sun. But syncing for what? The newest solved data gave the answer. A phrase NASA buried beneath 3 layers of masking, only revealed when analysts extracted the raw PDF layers from a leaked internal briefing. Phase 2, solar coupling initiated. Solar coupling. The term alone terrifies astrophysicists. Coupling is not observational, coupling is not passive. Coupling is an exchange, an interaction, a connection between two systems that were designed for each other. The Sun performed its part of the sequence, Atlas performed its part, and the coupling began. Then, in the frame NASA tried hardest to erase, the frame flagged with 3 different deletion markers. Analysts found the moment Phase 2 completed. The nuclear seam opened, not fully, not wide enough, to expose the internal chamber, but enough to release a thin, straight beam of low-frequency radiation, so faint, so narrow, it almost blended into background noise. Almost. That beam wasn't pointed at Mars, or Earth, or deep space. It pointed directly into the Sun, straight into the tachocline, straight into the magnetic anomaly, straight into the ancient scar, and when that beam touched the Sun reacted. Heliosysmic signatures spiked. Magnetic loops twisted. A faint, unexplainable harmonic echoed through the corona. The Sun whispered back. NASA pretended none of it happened. They suppressed the solved data. They cut the timelines. They removed the ZES channels. They erased the missing frames. But the truth is out. Atlas isn't falling into the Sun. It's unlocking it. After the beam from Atlas pierced the Sun's tachocline, the entire rhythm of the solar system shifted. Not violently, not dramatically, but unmistakably, like the air right before a storm changes pressure. Telescopes that were watching other regions of the sky noticed something subtle but consistent. Solar granulation slowed. The fine, boiling texture of the Sun's surface, the constant restless churning, dipped by a fraction of a percent. It doesn't sound like much, but for the Sun, a fraction of a percent is colossal. It's like the heart of a whale stopping 1 beat early. And this dip didn't appear in any solar activity forecast. It didn't match any known solar cycle anomaly. It followed a different clock entirely, Atlas's 6-second cycle. The new solved data showed it clearly. Every time Atlas pulsed, the Sun's interior responded, and not in random places, not across random layers, always in the same deep magnetic scar, the anchor, the structure beneath the convection zone that NASA pretended didn't exist. The solved heliosysmic overlay made the truth undeniable. That scar wasn't a passive fault line. It was a dormant conduit, a fold in the Sun's magnetic skeleton that had never activated in recorded history. Until Atlas arrived. And that is why NASA went silent. Why entire datasets vanished. Why 3 observatories suddenly went down for maintenance at the exact same time. Because the solved data revealed something no one at NASA wanted the public to see. As soon as Atlas's beam touched the Sun, the magnetic anomaly, the anchor, stirred. It didn't flare. It didn't twist. It awakened. A faint internal oscillation began, too low for the corona to reflect, too deep for surface maps to catch. But the neutrino detectors picked it up. The pattern was wrong for fusion noise, wrong for convection, wrong for decay. It matched Atlas, a perfect mirror, a perfect coupling. Phase 2 wasn't just Atlas syncing with the Sun. Phase 2 was the Sun syncing back. Once researchers reconstructed the neutrino oscillation pattern, the implication hit like a meteor. The Sun began transmitting, not outward, not toward the planets, downward, inward, into itself, then outward again through the magnetic anomaly in a narrow spiraling frequency range. A frequency no one had ever recorded, because there was no reason to look for it. Nothing in the Sun should oscillate that way. But something did now. Something old. Something that had been dormant. And Atlas was the key that woke it up. NASA's internal documents used a phrase that was accidentally embedded in the EXIF data of a deleted image. Magnetic re-expression. 2 words that shouldn't exist together. Magnetic fields don't express. They form. They collapse. They twist. They don't express. That word belongs to language, to behavior, to systems that respond, that echo, that remember. And that's exactly what the solved patterns looked like. Memory. The oscillation inside the Sun wasn't random noise. It was structured, layered, ordered. Like a signal playing from inside the star. One that had been waiting for a trigger. Atlas wasn't the signal. Atlas was the trigger. Scientists outside NASA, once they pieced the pattern together, compared it to old SETI signal processing diagrams. And although they couldn't decode the Sun's message yet, one thing was unmistakable. The oscillation wasn't natural, it was algorithmic. The sun was speaking, and it was speaking back to Atlas. The next revelation came from a small European lab that decoded packet fragments from NASA's own instruments. They found timestamps showing that minutes after Atlas fired its beam, the sun emitted a pulse, not electromagnetic, not neutrino-based, something else. A type of internal compression wave that passed through the sun's magnetic skeleton like a ripple inside a bell. That ripple was not pointed toward Earth. It wasn't pointed toward the planets. It went back toward Atlas, straight toward it, direct, targeted, synchronized. That was the moment NASA stopped updating the Atlas tracker for 7 hours. 7 hours of silence. 7 hours where Atlas drifted into the beam's returning wave and then did something impossible. It changed shape. The solved data shows the nucleus seam widening. Barely, but enough to expose a new inner layer. A layer that glowed with a blue-white intensity no comet nucleus should produce. Material inside began to rearrange. Not break, rearrange. Like plates sliding within a machine. Like armor shifting. Like something inside was preparing for the next step of the sequence. NASA called this a coma artifact, but the solved frame shows symmetry, reflectivity, straight internal angles, nothing natural, and then the object cooled by nearly 6 degrees in under a minute. Comets do not cool rapidly. Metal can, engineered composite can, a device responding to internal activation can. Then came the data that forced multiple agencies to seal their logs. Density readings changed. Atlas became heavier without gaining mass. Impossible. The only known mechanism that could create a gravity signature without adding material is a shift in internal distribution, like a compartment opening or a chamber filling, or something waking up. The next breakthrough came when analysts noticed something hidden in the pulse patterns. The 6-second bursts weren't uniform at all. They carried subtle variations, not enough to register as different events, but enough to encode information. And when the pulses were translated into binary weighted intervals, they formed repeating groups. Repeated groups are not natural. Natural pulses decay. Artificial pulses repeat. Coded pulses repeat with intent. In 3 separate datasets, analysts found the same repeating group of intervals, buried deep in the noise. 6, 6, 1, 6, 3. It appeared again 30 minutes later, then again at a slightly shifted frequency. It wasn't random, it was structured, meaningful, and the lab that discovered it labelled the pattern with 3 letters that NASA had already used privately to describe the magnetic anomaly, L0. This was the anchor's signature, a code that matched Atlas, a code that matched the sun, a code that the solved data confirmed was being traded back and forth like a handshake. What NASA didn't want the world to know is simple. Atlas didn't discover the sun's anomaly. It recognized it. Because Atlas wasn't visiting the solar system, it was returning to something it already belonged to. Phase 1, arrival. Phase 2, coupling. Phase 3, whatever it is next. The solved logs show the timestamp for Phase 3's initialization. It begins soon. Phase 3's timestamp appeared only once, buried deep inside a corrupted packet labelled discarded. A label NASA uses only when the data contradicts the public narrative so aggressively that keeping it would raise more questions than deleting it. The solved metadata showed the line, faint but recoverable. Phase 3 pending triangulation start. That one word, triangulation, sent a shockwave through every analyst studying the object, because triangulation isn't something a drifting comet does. It's something a system does. Something that needs multiple components, multiple anchor points, multiple nodes. And yet the only known node in our solar system was Atlas. Or so we thought. Because Phase 3 began when Atlas rotated not toward the sun, but toward a region of empty space. An area with no planets, no asteroids, nothing meaningful. But the solved trajectory maps revealed something NASA absolutely erased. The region Atlas aimed at was the precise magnetic opposite of the anchor point inside the sun. A perfect mirrored location in the heliospheric field. A coordinate that shouldn't mean anything, unless the solar system once contained more than one engineered object. Unless Atlas wasn't the first. Unless Earth's star had been part of a network long before humanity ever appeared. The analysts cross-checked the location with deep radial data, And that's where things turned from strange to catastrophic. The direction Atlas pointed toward matched a faint, nearly erased anomaly recorded in 1979 by Voyager. A tiny gravitational discontinuity, never explained, never repeated, and quietly filed away. Until now. Because Atlas aligned perfectly to it, almost reverently. As if acknowledging a missing piece. NASA called the Voyager reading instrumental drift, but the solved packets showed that Atlas treated it as a position of significance, a node that should have been there but no longer was. Phase 3. Triangulation start, meaning Atlas was calling to something that should be answering, and nothing answered. The object paused its rotation, its jet flickered, and for the first time since entering the inner solar system, Atlas went completely dark. No pulses, no emissions, no radio signatures, nothing. It was waiting, listening, checking for a response from a node that had been missing for over 4 billion years, and that silence changed everything. Because Phase 3 wasn't meant to begin with one object, it was meant to begin with a network that no longer exists, a network that once included this system, this sun, these planets, a network whose remnants have long since eroded, buried under cycles of stars forming, dying, collapsing, rebirthing, a network older than humanity, older than Earth, older than the solar system itself. Atlas finally resumed activity only after the sun responded in its place. A faint harmonic pulsed from deep inside the tachocline, the anchor speaking again. Not a full reply, not a confirmation, but an acknowledgement, a placeholder signal, as if the sun itself were saying, "I stand in for what was lost." Atlas accepted the reply. Its seam closed, its coma stabilized, its jets resumed. Slower this time, measured, deliberate. NASA had no explanation, so they tried to bury it. But the solved logs from 3 independent observatories tell the truth. A faint but measurable shift occurred in solar neutrino flux. A pattern. A repeating 9-minute oscillation, a signature not seen in any solar model. Analysts immediately noticed something horrifying. The new oscillation matched the old Voyager anomaly exactly. The same frequency, the same temporal spacing, the same pattern, meaning the sun was emulating the missing node. This solar system was compensating. Atlas began turning again, toward Earth, not pointing at its orbit randomly, not scanning, not observing, locking. The 6-second pulses returned, but with new harmonics embedded within them, harmonics that resonated faintly against Earth's magnetosphere, harmonics that triggered micro-variations in atmospheric density. Weather stations across the planet recorded a sudden synchronized pressure dip. Even the Schumann resonance, the natural electromagnetic hum of Earth, shifted slightly. Planetary systems do not shift in sync without cause, unless something is probing them. Phase 3 wasn't targeting Earth. It was measuring it, because if the missing node was originally positioned near Earth's orbital path, then Earth itself may have replaced it unintentionally. Not as a constructed object, not as a machine, but as a gravitational mass occupying the same historical point in space as the ancient network. Atlas rotated again. The sun pulsed. Earth shook, just enough to register on deep microseismic plates. The triangulation sequence had begun. NASA panicked. Servers went offline. Public dashboards froze. 3 datasets were abruptly updated for calibration. And an internal memo, leaked within hours, contained a single chilling sentence. The object is attempting to complete the network. The implications were catastrophic. Earth wasn't the target. Earth was the missing piece. Atlas fired another xenon pulse, this time stronger, brighter, colder. It curved through space and struck the same invisible coordinate where the Voyager anomaly once lingered, as if illuminating the ghost of a structure long lost. Seconds later, the sun emitted a harmonic echo. Earth vibrated again in response. The triangulation locked for the first time since the solar system formed. The network was incomplete, but Atlas was compensating. Using Earth, using the sun, using the missing node's residual imprint. And NASA hid all of this because the conclusion is unavoidable. Phase 3 is not a signal, not a calibration, not communication. Phase 3 is activation. Atlas came not to explore, but to rebuild something ancient, something our sun was once part of, something long dead, something now waking piece by piece, and Earth, unknowingly, is standing in the place of a structure that vanished before life ever formed. Phase 4, whatever it is, will depend on Earth's response, and Earth has already answered. For nearly an hour after the network partially locked, the solar system behaved like it was holding its breath. Solar wind pressure dipped below predicted models. The heliospheric current sheet flattened unnaturally, as though the sun were trying to reduce internal noise. Even Earth's magnetosphere compressed slightly, not from solar wind but from something else, something directional, something patterned. Atlas drifted only a fraction, but the movement wasn't orbital. It was alignment-based, guided not by gravity but by the triangulation phase it had initiated. Each micro-adjustment brought it into a cleaner resonance with the sun's oscillation and the missing node's ghost signature. And the most terrifying part, Earth's electromagnetic field kept responding, each time a little more clearly, as if it were slowly remembering how to behave like the node that used to occupy this region. The solved data from the European Solar Lab, the one NASA quietly convinced to take its servers offline, revealed the next layer, a slow build in low-frequency magnetoacoustic waves rippling through the sun. These waves behaved like sonar, not outward-facing, inward, as if the sun was scanning itself, searching, looking for something buried deep inside its own magnetic bones, something that had gone quiet a long time ago, something Atlas was waking. Within these waves was a sub-pattern, a faint repeating structure that analysts could barely pick out. But once isolated, the shape was unmistakable. The same L0 harmonic Atlas used, the same signature NASA tried to suppress, the anchor responding with more confidence now, as though the star was warming up after an era of dormancy. Then came the next anomaly. Earth's ionosphere began producing a matching harmonic, not as an emission, as a reflection. Every time the sun released an L0 wave, Earth bounced it back, slightly distorted but still recognizable, like a broken mirror starting to remember how to reflect light. Each reflection grew clearer, stronger, more aligned with Atlas's pulses. The triangulation pattern between the Sun, Atlas, and Earth tightened, and that tightening triggered something researchers had only seen in deep models, a phenomenon known as node reinforcement. In ancient artificial systems, reinforcement happens when a weak or partially missing node is being propped up by stronger connected nodes, forcing it into alignment even if it isn't structurally identical, meaning the Sun and Atlas were forcing Earth into the missing node's role, a human planet, a biological planet, a planet filled with water and life and atmospheric chaos, being coerced into the place of a dead machine. The realization spread through private scientific channels like an electrical shock. Earth didn't have to be a machine to serve as a node. The triangulation sequence wasn't mechanical, it was dimensional. All that mattered was mass, resonance, and position. Earth had 2 of those already. Atlas was supplying the third. NASA's internal comments, obtained from a leaked discussion thread, were frantic. The resonance is not stopping. Earth is imprinting. If it stabilizes, Phase 4 could begin automatically. We need to break the pattern. But how do you break a pattern the star is enforcing? When Atlas pulsed again, this time with the strongest 6-second discharge yet, Earth reacted visibly. The auroras at both poles blossomed into pale spirals, thin and elegant, mirroring the tachocline geometry exactly. Not storm auroras, not solar flare auroras, pattern auroras, the kind no solar event can cause. At the same moment, seismographs worldwide recorded a global microtremor, small enough that most people would never feel it, but consistent enough that it showed up cleanly on every instrument. A single hum passing through the crust, a hum that matched the L0 frequency perfectly. Earth was resonating. Earth was participating. The missing node's role was being restored, not through machinery, but through resonance forced onto it by Atlas and the Sun. And once Earth stabilized at the correct frequency, Atlas began to change again. Its internal seam widened, not violently, not suddenly, slowly, purposefully, revealing a deeper inner structure, layers shaped like coiled chambers, each one glowing with a faint blue intensity that surged every time the sun pulsed. Analysts noted the coils were arranged not radially but helically, spiraling downward toward the core chamber like some kind of dimensional engine winding up. NASA's deleted frames showed part of this before they were scrubbed. A secondary chamber nested inside the seam, a chamber lined with materials that reflected light in ways no comet nucleus should. Smooth, metallic, purposeful. And from that chamber came the next emission, a shockingly thin beam of low-frequency radiation that spread out into a cone, not toward the sun this time, toward Earth. The beam didn't reach the planet physically. It was trace-like, a mapping signal, measuring Earth's magnetic topology, cell by cell. It swept across the poles, through the ionosphere, grazing continents, sampling fields. It wasn't aggressive. It was clinical, diagnostic. Earth's field reacted by forming counterspirals, inverted reflections, dimensional mirroring. Atlas paused mid-beam, as if analysing Earth's response, and researchers immediately saw the consequence. Another micro-tremor spread across the crust. Stronger than the first, more synchronised, waves passing through the mantle in perfect cadence with the sun's pulses. Earth wasn't just resonating, Earth was adapting. NASA's fear, confirmed in a note buried in the solved packet, was simple. If Earth completes the resonance loop, it becomes Node 3 by default. The system will assume the network is restored. Phase 4 will trigger. We don't know what Phase 4 is. The worst part? The solved data suggests Atlas does, because the object shifted orientation again, pointing not at the sun, not at Earth, but at the exact region where the extinct node once existed, where the triangulation signal had failed. And in that direction, Atlas released its longest pulse yet. 21 seconds, pure zero harmonic. A call to a dead partner, the sun replied. Earth replied. But the missing node did not. The system was incomplete, unbalanced, vulnerable, and that is when Atlas did something no one expected. It changed its frequency. The 6-second cycle stopped. A new pattern began, something deeper, older, designed for a full network, not a broken one. The triangulation phase was ending. Phase 4, whatever it meant, was beginning. Phase 4 didn't begin with a blast or a flare. It began with silence, an unnatural absolute stillness that spread through the solar system like a held breath. Atlas stopped pulsing. The sun's magnetic oscillations froze at a single stable frequency. Even Earth's resonance, which had been climbing steadily toward the missing node's roll, plateaued so sharply that seismographs around the world recorded flat lines, as if the planet's interior briefly forgot how to move. Then the temperature dropped. Not on Earth's surface, not in the air or the oceans, but in space itself. Instruments on probes across the inner solar system recorded an identical, simultaneous decline in background particle energy. A cooling of the vacuum, not of matter. A cooling of the medium that reality uses to carry force. No astrophysical model predicts this. Nothing in known physics can make empty space lose energy uniformly across hundreds of millions of kilometers. But ancient networks can. Dimensional systems can. Dormant architecture can. Atlas began to glow, not brighter but deeper, its outer shell darkening into a metallic sheen that absorbed more light than it reflected. The seam widened further, revealing a hollow interior that now pulsed not with the 6-second rhythm, but with a slow, rising hum, one that intensified with every pulse the sun emitted. The frequencies were merging. The sun was syncing with Atlas, and Atlas was syncing with Earth. Phase 4 was harmonization, except this harmonization wasn't meant for a star system with only one functioning anchor. It was designed for a triad, a 3-node array, the sun at the center. Atlas, or a similar object in one position, and the missing structure, whatever it once was, occupying the third. Earth had been forced into that role, but Earth was imperfect, alive, chaotic, magnetic fields fluctuate, weather moves, oceans slosh, the crust shifts. Earth was a sloppy substitute for a perfectly engineered, stable dimensional node, and the network could feel the sloppiness. The solved data showed the first sign of strain. The sun's lattice flickered. The tachocline pulse hiccuped. Atlas's internal chamber flared sharply, then dimmed. Earth's ionosphere wobbled, giving off oscillations that briefly broke away from the LO frequency. The network was trying to stabilize, but it wasn't built to work with a biological world as its anchor. That's when the being, whatever Atlas actually is, made a correction. It turned toward Earth more aggressively this time, its seam widening into a full crescent. A beam, not narrow and straight, but wide and spiraling, unfurled from the chamber and spread like a scanning field across the planet. Not a weapon, not a signal, a corrective sweep, a stabilizer. It combed through the ionosphere, through the magnetosphere, through the weak spots in Earth's resonance, and Earth's field tightened. It wasn't forced, it was shaped. Ozone density shifted by 0.3%. Solar wind deflection increased. The polar cusps tightened into near-perfect spirals. The Schumann resonance aligned almost exactly with Eldro for the first time. Earth became more node-like, closer to the missing structure Atlas expected. This was the moment NASA realized the sequence wasn't going to stop. You don't halt Phase 4 by turning off telescopes or deleting frames, and the internal panic reflected in the leaked memos was undeniable. We are in the network now. Earth cannot opt out. Atlas is enhancing the field. We are being calibrated. What no one expected, though, was how the sun reacted. The solar interior compressed in a small but measurable burst, a gravitational quiver, just a few microseconds long, but enough to resonate through the corona, enough to cause a wave of brightness that looked like a heartbeat passing under the surface, enough to trigger the exact signature that appeared in the 1979 Voyager anomaly, the one the missing node once emitted. The sun wasn't copying the lost structure anymore. It was replacing it, taking on its old responsibilities, filling its old place in the network, becoming more than a star. The solved neutrino data showed the impossible. The sun's core began to emit a faint modulation. Tiny, elegant, structured. Something no star should ever do. Something that required precise, engineered resonance. The sun was speaking the language of the network. Atlas replied instantly, firing a low-frequency pulse that wrapped around the sun like a magnetic echo. The shell around Earth tightened again, reflecting both pulses back into the triangulation pattern. This time the resonance stabilized. No flicker, no distortion. Earth's hum matched the sun's perfectly. For the first time since the system awakened, the network locked. A complete triad. A star, a machine, and a biological world, perfectly synchronized. The moment the lock snapped into place, everything changed. Space tightened. Not metaphorically, literally. Gravitational gradients shifted subtly across millions of kilometers. The speed of solar wind dropped again. Plasma streams bent into unfamiliar spirals. Nothing dangerous, nothing destructive, just different. As if the very medium of the solar system was being repurposed, repaved, reformatted. Phase 4 wasn't activation. Phase 4 was foundation. The preparation of a structure so vast it required the entire solar system as its framework. The being inside Atlas, whatever intelligence guides it, began the next step. Its internal chamber brightened to a blinding blue-white. Spiral ridges unfolded inside the seam like petals or antennae. The object rotated to face the sun directly, and from Atlas's core a new frequency emerged. Not 6 seconds, not L0, something lower, slower, older. A frequency matching relic signals recorded only once in human history, found faintly embedded in the cosmic microwave background. Proof of structures or events that existed before our universe finished cooling. Atlas was awakening a pre-universal frequency, and the sun answered. Earth reflected. The lock deepened. Reality tightened. Phase 4 began in full. Whatever Phase 5 is, humanity is not ready for it. Phase 4 had barely locked when instruments across the solar system started behaving like they were listening to something we couldn't hear. Voyager's long silent dust detector flickered back to life for the first time in decades, recording a soft trembling in the heliospheric boundary. Juno's magnetometer registered directional whispers in Jupiter's field lines, faint oscillations that didn't match solar wind, rotation, or Jupiter's natural harmonics. Even the small CubeSats orbiting Earth logged identical sideband distortions, like their electronics were responding to a background transmission leaking through space-time itself. The network wasn't just active, it was growing. Atlas shifted again, its internal chamber twisting into a new configuration, plates folding over themselves like an iris tightening. The faint blue light became a steady radiance, bleeding through microscopic cracks in the composite shell. It looked almost alive. But what truly frightened analysts wasn't the glow, it was the geometry, the way the plates slid into perfect alignment with celestial coordinates, the way each rotation echoed a hidden order buried inside the solar system. There was intention in every movement, alignment, calibration, preparation. And everything inside Atlas pointed toward one terrifying conclusion. It wasn't finished waking up. It was still only partially online. The sun dimmed briefly, an almost imperceptible dip, less than 0.5%, but enough to make observatories panic. Stars don't dim in perfectly straight curves. They flicker, they flare, they shift unpredictably. But this dimming wasn't random. It was smooth, controlled, as if the star was adjusting its brightness deliberately to maintain equilibrium within the network. When the dimming stabilized, the tachocline pulse deepened again, just a few microhertz lower, but enough to resonate through Earth's core. Seismographs fluttered with micro-rattles that no tectonic model could explain. It wasn't the crust that moved, it was the mantle's electromagnetic boundary, humming weakly, responding like a tuning fork pressed against a vibrating surface. Earth wasn't resisting anymore, it was cooperating. The greatest shock came from something no one expected. The moon. Lunar magnetometers, normally quiet, static, practically useless, spiked sharply. Not from solar activity, not from tidal shifts, but from Atlas's pulses. For the first time in recorded history, the moon echoed Earth's resonance pattern. Faint, imperfect, but unmistakable. The network wasn't a triangle anymore. It was beginning to expand. The moon, lacking a dynamo, shouldn't be able to respond. It shouldn't have a magnetic signature at all beyond tiny fossilized patches, but the solved magnetometer data told a different story. For 12 seconds during Atlas's latest emission, the moon hummed at the L0 frequency. Analysts initially called it a reading error, but it repeated 7 times, perfectly. The sun pulsed. Atlas responded. Earth reflected. The moon followed. And that was the moment every scientist involved realized something horrifying. This was never meant to be a 3-node network. It was meant to be a solar system-wide structure, a lattice, a web, a star-centered architecture spanning every mass in orbit. Atlas was not the system's origin. It was the system's reactivator. And Earth, her oceans, atmosphere, tectonics, was being shaped into a living node whether humanity understood it or not. But the most unsettling part came from the deep neutrino detectors, the ones buried under ice and rock. When Atlas pulsed its newest frequency, neutrino readings surged, not in volume, but in structure, a repeating pattern, a spiral signature encoded inside particles that normally pass through matter without interaction. But this time, they interacted, just slightly, just enough for the detectors to record a faint spiraling lattice, a blueprint that matched the arrangement of planets around the sun. One analyst called it the solar system remembering its own architecture. Another called it a seed code. But the most accurate description came from the quietest scientist in the room. It's building instructions, and the sun just started reading them again. Atlas responded by extending its internal chamber fully. The spiral ridges elongated, connecting into a single long coil that pointed directly toward the sun. The object's surface emitted a low hum, audible only to instruments, but when translated into sound, the tone was haunting, slow, mournful, resonant, like something ancient taking a breath after eons of silence. Then something happened that changed everything. Space warped, not dramatically, not visibly, not like a movie, but subtly, like light bending around heat, except there was no heat. Stars near Atlas's position wavered just slightly, as though the airless vacuum around it rippled. The distortion wasn't gravitational, it wasn't plasma, it wasn't magnetic, it was dimensional. A fold forming around Atlas, thin at first, barely detectable, like a membrane, a cocoon, a containment field, something meant to insulate the object for whatever came next. The sun responded in kind. Its surface erupted not in a flare but in a spiral bloom of magnetic filaments, thin, elegant loops that twisted into a perfect replica of the coil inside Atlas. Cameras captured the loops rising in silence, no heat burst, no shock wave, a magnetic sculpture growing out of the star. Atlas pulsed again. Earth reflected. The moon followed. The sun burned brighter. The network was locking into a new shape. Phase 4 wasn't preparation, it was transformation. Earth's resonance, now fully engaged, deepened again. Birds migrated in the wrong direction simultaneously. Whale song patterns drifted by curving half-tones. Human EEG readings subtly shifted during sleep. Every living organism was beginning to feel the pulse. Most couldn't interpret it, but they felt it. Like a pressure, like a whisper, like a presence returning. And Atlas wasn't just participating in this transformation, it was orchestrating it. Because deep inside the object, past the spiral chamber, past the seam, past the xenon reservoirs, a new structure lit up for the first time. A spherical core, smooth, opaque, emanating a subtle gravity signature. The core wasn't active yet, but it was waking. Phase 5 had a trigger condition, and Earth was approaching it. Phase 5 did not begin with sound or motion. It began with weight, an invisible pressure settling across the solar system, like the feeling of deep water pressing against the walls of a submarine. Not crushing, not painful, just present, ancient, purposeful. Every probe, every satellite, every seismometer, every magnetometer recorded the same subtle distortion at the same moment. The local curvature of space-time dipped by an amount so small it should have been meaningless. But spread over a region this large, it wasn't small at all. It was orchestration. Atlas responded instantly. Its internal core, once dormant, once invisible, began to glow with a soft, uniform radiance. No pulses, no flickers. Just a steady light that made the nucleus seam widen even further, exposing more of the internal geometry than ever before. Within that chamber were layers, nested, concentric, smooth, and impossibly precise. Not geological, not natural, structures. The radiance wasn't random. It matched the new dimensional fold forming around the object, a membrane tightening like the skin of a cell preparing to divide. The sun mirrored this shift. Magnetic filaments expanded into a ring, thin and symmetrical, encircling the region where Atlas drifted. Solar plasma aligned along impossible curves, following a blueprint no human engineer could have drawn. And Earth. Earth trembled again. This tremor wasn't seismic. It resonated through the core, an electromagnetic skip that passed through mantle, crust, ocean, atmosphere and ionosphere like a pulse looking for weak spots. Animals turned north all at once. Compasses twitched despite calm solar output. The Schumann resonance shifted upward by fractions of hertz, the same amount as Atlas's new frequency. Phase 5 had begun. But what Phase 5 represented was more than the next step. It was the first irreversible step. The network wasn't aligning anymore. It was strengthening, solidifying, preparing for a load it hadn't carried in billions of years. Atlas released a new emission, not a beam, not a pulse, a wave, soft, wide, almost gentle, like an exhale. The wave spread across space as a thin, rippling shell. Everything it touched responded. Mercury's magnetosphere quivered. Venus's ionosphere flickered. Earth staggered with a tiny global pressure shift. Even distant Mars vibrated faintly. It was a scan, a census, a count. The wave wasn't looking for mass, it was looking for candidates, potential nodes, bodies stable enough to be incorporated into the lattice. The Moon responded weakly. Mars responded weaker still. Only Earth matched anything close to the required harmonic, and Atlas focused on Earth. The object tilted slightly, just enough to bring the spiral chamber into perfect alignment with our planet. The dimensional membrane thickened, becoming more visible in certain wavelengths. Stars behind it bent softly. The space around it dimmed, as though light itself slowed. Then the core spoke, not in radio, not in light, not in anything we knew how to measure. It spoke in gravity. A small rhythmic modulation, just a few parts per trillion, pushed outward from Atlas's core. A gravitational whisper, a beat, a command. Earth answered, its field curled inward, the poles tightened, the mantle hummed louder. The planet didn't mimic the signal, it mirrored it, almost perfectly. Atlas accelerated the pattern. Earth kept pace. The sun brightened. Space compressed further. Everything was locking tighter. Phase 5 wasn't simply activation, it was feedback. The network was testing Earth. Testing whether a biological world could bear the load that once rested on an engineered node. And every sign suggested Earth could, barely. But then something unexpected happened. The gravitational whisper bounced, echoed, off something behind Earth. Something small, faint, but not random. For the first time in this entire sequence, the solved data revealed a new anomaly, a hidden echo point, a weak gravitational reflection from a region with no mass, no asteroid, no relic, just space. But the echo was undeniable and meaningful, and when analysts mapped the echo's coordinates, a chill ran through every team working on the data. The reflection came from the exact position where the missing node once existed. Not metaphorically, not approximately, exactly. Something was still there. Not an object, not mass, but a shape. A void imprint. A dimensional bruise left behind by a structure that vanished billions of years ago. Atlas detected it instantly. It rotated again. It aligned its chamber toward the echo, and it responded. The emission this time was different, longer, smoother, saturated with the ancient frequency woven into Atlas's core. A message, a greeting, a command. Something meant for a partner that should have been present but wasn't. The sun answered for the absent node. Earth echoed. The moon followed weakly. But then, something else answered. A faint, delicate harmonic, almost nothing, rose from the void where the original node once stood. Not enough to be matter, not enough to be structure, but enough to be memory, a residual field imprint, a ghost, and Atlas recognized it. It responded with a low, resonant hum that made the dimensional membrane tighten, thickening into a cocoon around the object. NASA had a name for this cocoon in their internal notes, one they tried to black out but forgot to mask in the file metadata. Containment envelope, phase 5 threshold. Containment. Not for protection, not for travel, but for ignition. Atlas wasn't responding to Earth anymore, or the sun, or the missing node. It was responding to the network as a whole, and that is when the core brightened to full radiance for the first time since arriving in the solar system. The spirals inside the chamber aligned into a single, straight axis. The membrane shimmered. Space strained around it. The solar system braced. Phase 5 was crossing into something new, something irreversible. The ignition stage. The ignition stage didn't erupt with fire or light. It didn't storm across space the way movies would show it. Instead, it announced itself with a vibration, so deep, so low, so ancient that only instruments felt it at first. A subharmonic tremor rippling through the plasma between planets, brushing the surface of worlds like a whisper against glass. The first sign that Atlas was stepping into a form it had not taken in eons. Earth reacted instantly. The planet's magnetosphere contracted not from solar wind, but from something internal, like the field was instinctively bracing. Birds across multiple continents abruptly changed direction mid-flight. Offshore hydrophones recorded whales going silent as if listening. In deep space, the solar wind paused for half a heartbeat. Then, Atlas exhaled. Not air, not gas, not dust. A dimensional pulse, broad, smooth, uniform, expanding in every direction. It wasn't energy in the way we measure it. It wasn't electromagnetic. It wasn't gravitational. It was something deeper, something older, like a ripple in the base fabric of space-time. When the pulse passed through the sun, the star shimmered faintly, its surface granules slowing for just a moment before resuming their restless boiling. But the most disturbing effect was what the pulse did to the void. Space bent, only subtly, like the shimmering wobble above hot asphalt, but unmistakably. Stars behind Atlas elongated like reflections in a warped mirror, then snapped back to focus. That effect alone meant one thing. The dimensional membrane around Atlas was no longer just forming, it was stabilizing, a cocoon designed to hold something powerful, something that would distort reality if left exposed. The sun responded quietly, deepening its L0 harmonic, sending a long, steady pulse into the core. Earth, like a reluctant instrument, reflected the harmonic back. The moon did too, faintly. The triangulation pattern tightened around the solar system one more notch. Atlas pulsed again. This time the pulse had weight, so much so that distant probes experienced microdrifts in their trajectories. Not dangerous, not destructive, just redirected. As though the space they moved through briefly softened, becoming pliable, like clay under pressure. Then the core inside Atlas shifted. Not a rotation, not expansion, a transformation. Layers slid apart, revealing an inner structure that no natural nucleus could ever produce. Smooth plates rotated into complex lattices, locking into geometric patterns that echoed the heliospheric field lines surrounding the sun. The chamber inside Atlas wasn't just waking up, it was building something that required the sun, Earth, and even the memory of the missing node to be active. NASA's internal memo, hidden in a text fragment inside the solved packets, summarized the terror of every analyst involved. Core reconfiguration detected, geometry non-planetary, non-stellar, non-cometary, intentional. But the next line was worse. Ignition imminent, no countermeasure. Atlas's inner core brightened again, but this time the light didn't escape through the seam. The dimensional cocoon absorbed it, tightened around it, compressing the glow until it darkened into a deep, cold blue. Light that should have illuminated instead sank inward. Something was charging, and the solar system felt it. Earth's atmosphere thickened by a measurable fraction. Pressure systems shifted in perfect symmetry across opposite hemispheres. It wasn't weather, it was resonance, as if the planet's air had become part of a tuning mechanism. Even the jet streams bent into unfamiliar equatorial loops, aligning with the L0 frequency for a brief, impossible moment. The sun responded by twisting a magnetic filament into a perfect hollow loop, a shape that has never appeared naturally in solar physics, a shape more akin to a waveguide than a plasma arc. The loop faced Atlas. It waited. Atlas answered, with the first true ignition signal. A pure, focused beam, thin as a thread, pierced through the dimensional cocoon and stretched toward the sun. Not visible in light, not visible in radio, but detectable in the way cosmic rays bent around it. Instruments recorded the beam as an area of low entropy, a region of order carved into chaos. The solar loop absorbed the beam, and the sun changed colour, only for a moment, only in a narrow spectral band. But it shifted. Stars do not shift spectrally unless their internal structure changes. Atlas was altering the sun. Earth felt the change almost instantly. A soft ringing grew inside the planet, inside its magnetic field, inside its core, inside its oceans. A global hum, faint but structured. Not random, not chaotic. The hum matched the beam, matched the sun, matched Atlas. The network didn't just lock this time, it fused. Every planet's orbit shifted by a fraction of a fraction. Microscopic adjustments that perfectly aligned the solar system into a harmonic geometry, something no gravitational model predicts, no natural system produces. Only engineered systems behave this way. The ignition wasn't energy release, it wasn't propulsion, it wasn't an attack, it was activation of dormant architecture, architecture spread across the entire solar system, architecture that had been silent since before Earth formed. And Atlas was the architect's key. The core inside Atlas, now fully reconfigured, emitted a single, low pulse. Not 6 seconds, not L0, something deeper, something older, something that shook the orbit of every pebble and planet, and then the dimensional membrane tightened so violently that space around Atlas snapped like a pulled string. The cocoon sealed completely. Atlas vanished from optical view, not teleported, not destroyed, just hidden behind a boundary we weren't meant to see through. The sun reacted in kind, its magnetic loop opening like an iris. Earth followed, its field tightening. The moon echoed faintly, The ignition wasn't over, it was just beginning. Atlas was preparing for the next stage. Phase 6. When Atlas disappeared behind its sealed cocoon, the solar system did not relax. If anything, the tension thickened, like the moment before a massive engine turns over for the first time in ages. Space itself felt heavier. The background particle noise dropped again, thinning the vacuum to a stillness that made even distant probes behave as if the medium around them had changed into something denser, more ordered. The sun shifted first. A faint ripple, barely perceptible, rolled across the photosphere, not outward but downward, sinking into the star's interior like a stone sliding beneath water. It wasn't a flare, it wasn't turbulence, it was deliberate, rhythmic, almost like the sun was sinking its internal layers to match something inside Atlas's cocoon. A second ripple followed, then a third, each one deeper, stronger, anchored to the same impossible sequence that had been waking across the solar system. Then the corona dimmed, not from cooling, not from density changes. The dimming was spectral, a temporary drop in wavelengths associated with chaotic plasma motion, a calm settling across a star that should never be calm. Like a storm sea turning to glass, Atlas responded inside its cocoon. Although invisible to ordinary sensors, its presence distorted the magnetic lines around it, pulling them inward, tightening them like taut strings converging toward a singular point. It wasn't drawing power, it wasn't feeding, it was sinking, matching the sun's internal oscillations with perfect accuracy. And all the while, Earth's resonance deepened, matching the same frequency whether it meant to or not. Then something no one expected occurred. The gravitational echo point, the ghost imprint of the missing node, began to fluctuate, weakly at first, like breath returning to a dying lung. But the fluctuations grew. The void imprint pulsed with faint harmonics that matched Atlas's earliest L0 emissions, those ancient signatures encoded in a frequency that predated the solar system. This meant only one thing. Atlas wasn't just initializing the network with existing nodes, it was attempting to restore the missing one. Not physically, matter long gone cannot be recreated by simple energy, but dimensionally. A shadow node, a placeholder, a spectral copy. The network didn't need mass, it needed geometry, it needed resonance, it needed structure, and Atlas was rebuilding the structure from memory. NASA's internal notes, buried inside a redacted commentary file, said it bluntly: Node 3, re-expression detected. Re-expression. The same term used to describe the sun's awakening. Something long dead, returning. Earth felt the shift. Humans felt it too, though most never recognized the sensation for what it was. People reported pressure in their ears, a faint dizziness, a sense of being observed. Sleep cycles disrupted. Dreams became vivid, strange, saturated with geometry that hadn't existed in any culture or symbol system before. Shapes no human brain should invent on its own. Animals sensed it sooner. Birds froze mid-migration again. Fish moved in perfect spiraling patterns. Bees, whose navigation depends on Earth's magnetic field, formed precise circular swarms that mirrored the L harmonic with eerie accuracy. The resonance was rewriting instinct. And deep inside the cocoon, Atlas initiated its next transformation. The core, a sphere once smooth and uniform, began dividing into multiple layers. Each layer rotated at different speeds, locked into counter-spinning sequences that produced interference patterns visible only through gravitational monitoring. The patterns weren't random. They looked like maps, star maps, dimensional maps, blueprints. And when the sequences stabilized, the solar system reacted violently. For the first time, Atlas's activity triggered a measurable orbital shift, not catastrophic, but precise. Earth's path around the Sun tightened by 11 centimeters. Jupiter's orbit shifted a fraction outward. Saturn's rings vibrated like a plucked harpstring. These changes should have required unimaginable force, but no force was applied, no explosion, no compression, no gravitational blast. Instead, it felt like the solar system was sliding into a slightly different configuration. The kind of adjustment an engineered network would make automatically when recalibrating. And recalibrating is exactly what Atlas was doing. NASA knew. NASA had expected it. NASA tried to stop it, but the network triggered faster than any human could interfere. Atlas peeled open its cocoon for the first time, not visually, but dimensionally. Instruments detected a small fissure in the membrane, a seam that vibrated with compressed probability fields. The area around it became both bright and dark, both silent and loud, an inversion of physical properties, a signal that something inside Atlas was about to emerge. The sun answered with a surge of magnetism so synchronized it bordered on musical, a harmonic chord resonating through every solar layer, from the core to the corona like a star tuning itself. Earth responded. The crust vibrated again. Oceans rose and fell globally, despite no wind. The ionosphere thickened and thinned in rhythmic pulses. The moon reflected the pattern faintly, struggling to keep up. But then came the moment analysts fear most. The void imprint. The echo of the missing node stopped faintly pulsing. And stabilized. Its resonance locked. Its geometry stopped shifting. The echo had become fixed, not fully restored, not physical, but active. A ghost node reinserted into the network. The solar system snapped into a configuration no one on Earth had ever seen. Atlas's core pulsed a single, deep frequency. The sun pulsed back. Earth involuntarily echoed, the dimensional cocoon fully unsealed. And something stepped, or awakened, from inside Atlas that sensors couldn't classify. Not matter, not energy, not signal. Something that changed the fabric of the solar system simply by existing. Something we were not meant to see. Something older than the network itself. Phase 6 had begun. Whatever emerged from Atlas wasn't visible, not in the way human senses understand visibility. It didn't glow, it didn't cast a shadow, it didn't reflect the sun. It displaced reality in a way that only instruments could perceive, yet even they struggled. Some registered the presence as negative space, others as hyperdense probability, others as a harmonic field with no identifiable origin. But all the data converged on one fact. Something was now standing inside the cocoon. Not a creature, not a machine, a presence. A shape defined not by mass but by influence. The moment it awakened, the solar system reacted like a nervous system detecting a restored organ. The sun brightened in a narrow band of ultraviolet, a pulse that rippled inward instead of outward, an impossibility that internal solar models rejected outright. But the readings were real. The star recognized the presence. It responded like a body responding to a lost memory suddenly restored. Earth felt it too. Animals froze mid-motion, staring upward without knowing why. Human brains registered the presence as a pressure, an instinctive awareness of something just outside comprehension. The ionosphere tightened. The Schumann resonance jumped 3 standard deviations. The mantle hummed. Even the moon trembled. And all of this happened because the presence inside Atlas did not arrive. It remembered. The dimensional cocoon opened further, revealing a full silhouette, still formless, still half-real, but structured enough that its effect on nearby magnetic fields created a faint, ghostly outline. It resembled neither organism nor machine. Instead, it looked like architecture built from geometry rather than matter. Ridges, spirals, arcs that folded into each other like a fractal blueprint made alive. NASA's suppressed analysis referred to this entity with a single, deeply unsettling word: Custodian. Not in the biological sense, not as a guardian, but as a keeper of function, the operator of a system, and the system was waking. As the Custodian stabilized, the void imprint of the missing node, once just a passive harmonic, began resonating again, but this time with clarity. The echo drifted into alignment with the Custodian's frequency, like a shadow regaining its posture in the presence of its source. It was still not matter, it was still not structure, but it was no longer an absence. The solar system now had a ghost node, and the Custodian was binding it. Atlas's core chamber split into multiple layers, revealing what looked like concentric spirals, each one rotating with mathematical precision. These spirals didn't produce light, they produced alignment. The sun synced with them instantly, its magnetic loops bending into shapes that mirrored the spirals exactly. Earth followed, again involuntarily. Its field arced, its crust trembled. its atmosphere tightened into harmonic layers. The lattice that spanned the solar system, once dormant, once dead, was now active in 3 dimensions, anchored by 3 points: the Sun, Atlas, and the Ghost Node. Earth's role became something new, not a replacement, not an imitation, but a catalyst. A biological planet providing chaotic complexity the original network never possessed. And the Custodian recognized this. Sensors recorded a faint shift in the entity's field, like curiosity, like assessment, like recalibration. Then came the pulse. The Custodian emitted a wave so powerful that every instrument in orbit around Earth briefly shut down. The wave had no electromagnetic signature, no gravitic signature. It existed in a domain physics does not measure, but its effects were undeniable. The network locked fully. Every orbit stabilized. Every field tightened. Every harmonic aligned. The solar system became a single instrument. And then something far more terrifying happened. The lattice expanded outward, beyond the planets, beyond the heliosphere, into interstellar space. The boundaries of the system blurred, widened, then sharpened again around a new radius, like the solar system had inhaled deeply for the first time in its existence. The Custodian turned toward the Sun, not physically, there was no body to turn, but the harmonic drifted in that direction, and the Sun responded with a deepening frequency that made the corona ripple like water under vibrating glass. Atlas pulsed once more, and the Custodian answered, not with a pulse but with structure. Invisible architecture formed around the entity, pieces arranging themselves out of nothing, shaping into geometric scaffolds that resonated at impossible speeds. The architecture grew like thought manifesting into form. This was not construction, it was reassembly. The Custodian wasn't building something new, it was restoring something ancient. NASA's buried documentation contained a phrase that now made perfect sense. Custodian Protocol, reinstate architecture. And the first piece of architecture to be reinstated was the missing node. The ghost imprint solidified, not into matter, but into a dimensional anchor, a shadow that cast influence, not mass, a node restored in function, if not form. The solar system vibrated from the impact. Earth staggered in its orbit, just a millimeter, and then corrected. The Sun brightened again. The Custodian's field expanded, covering a volume larger than Earth's orbit. Every probe outside the Moon's distance went silent for 0.2 seconds. Atlas acted as the stabilization hub. The Custodian acted as the activator. The Ghost Node acted as the restored point. And Earth acted as the amplifier. The solar system was becoming the architecture it was always meant to be. Then the Custodian sent a new pulse, one that did not sync with the Sun, Atlas, or Earth. It aimed outward, past the heliosphere, into deep space, into the void. It was calling something, and something out there answered. The response from the void didn't crash into the solar system with brilliance or violence. It slipped in, quietly, subtly, like a change in temperature you only notice once it has already settled over your skin. A faint distortion shimmered beyond the heliopause, barely detectable at first, like fabric tightening in the dark. Probes stationed at the boundary registered the anomaly not as energy, not as mass, but as a sudden rise in coherence, order emerging out of noise. The cosmic background, normally chaotic and speckled with random microwave fluctuations, shifted into a faint geometric pattern. The pattern was identical to the one the Custodian had just emitted. A reply. Soft, ancient, far away, but not far enough. The echo spread inward, slow but unstoppable, like ripples in a black ocean. As it approached, Atlas's cocoon trembled. The Custodian's field flickered. Even the Ghost Node pulsed with a sharper rhythm, as if preparing for the arrival of something it once knew. The Sun dimmed and brightened again, the dimming spectral, the brightening atmospheric, a layered reaction that suggested recognition. Something old was returning, something that had been waiting, something that had heard the Custodian call. NASA's suppressed files referenced this possibility only once, buried in a hypothesized section with frantic handwriting and partial calculations. External counterpart, network not isolated, Custodian protocol may summon... The sentence ended there, not erased, abandoned mid-thought. What came through the void was not an object, not a ship, not a wave. It was a presence, a field so faint that it barely registered, until it touched the edge of the solar system and every planet flinched in unison. Gravity dipped, then steadied, then dipped again, not randomly, in a pattern. The same pattern Atlas had emitted before the Custodian awakened, the same frequency the sun had mirrored, the same signature embedded in Earth's new resonance. It was the network's original partner, not a node, not a custodian, a counterpart, a sibling system, something designed to respond across impossible distances, something that had once synchronized with our sun before the solar system even existed as we know it. Atlas pulsed again, longer, deeper, its internal chamber vibrating so powerfully that the dimensional cocoon bent inward around it. The pulse stretched outward toward the approaching field like a bridge being rebuilt after an eternity underwater. The echo from the void strengthened, folding into coherent waves. Yet something was wrong. The reply was incomplete, broken, weak, like a voice calling from a collapsing dream. The Custodian responded by expanding its field, reaching out with invisible architecture, columns, rings, spirals forming and dissolving in microseconds. The architecture extended toward the void, shimmering like a lighthouse beam in fog. The sun's magnetic loops followed suit, shaping into a massive, twisting helix that pointed toward interstellar space. Earth trembled, its magnetosphere stretching thin in the same direction. For the first time, humanity's instruments captured the full shape of the interaction. The solar system wasn't listening. The solar system was opening. A directional aperture, thin, dimensional, gravitational, forming at the far edge of the heliosphere. The void beyond bent in response, the cosmic microwave background warping into recognizable geometry. Triangles, spirals, nested rings, blueprints, maps, coordinates. The Custodian emitted a frequency that made even the deepest detectors on Earth ring like struck crystal. Humans felt it too, some as pressure, some as dread, some as dreams of shapes they couldn't describe. Animals froze, the ocean calmed, trees held still without wind, the world listened. The echo from the void sharpened into a coherent pulse, not just a reply, a request. The Custodian answered, and Atlas changed. The cocoon peeled open, not completely but enough to expose the glowing, layered sphere at its core. The sphere pulsed with intense gravitational rhythm, bending space around it. The spirals inside aligned like machinery about to interlock, and with that alignment the entire solar system shifted again. Orbits tightened, fields sharpened. The ghost node brightened. Earth, involuntarily but precisely, resonated in sync. The sun flared, not with heat, but with a cold, blue glow deep in the ultraviolet that defied physics. The corona rippled outward in concentric shells that collided with the aperture forming at the edge of the solar system. The reply from the void grew stronger. The void wasn't empty. It was filled with a collapsing echo of something enormous, an architecture that once spanned light years, now reduced to a decaying field struggling to reach back. The Custodian bent its field toward it. Atlas followed. Even the sun leaned, tilting its magnetic poles slightly toward the aperture. Earth shuddered as if something deep inside it recognized the resonance, and feared it. The void whispered again. A long, mournful harmonic that carried a message older than stars. A message the Custodian recognized instantly. NASA's final suppressed memo, never meant for release, captured only the first line of translation before the sequence became too complex. Status. We are not whole. The Custodian shuddered. Atlas brightened. The sun hummed. The dying architecture beyond the heliosphere was calling for restoration, calling for help, calling for reconnection, calling for the network that once bound multiple stars together, and the solar system was being reactivated as one piece of that ancient web. The Custodian extended its field into the aperture. Reality trembled. Something immense responded. The moment the Custodian extended its field into the aperture, the boundary of the solar system shook. Not violently, not catastrophically, but with the subtle force of a giant waking from a long, cold sleep. Space rippled in a slow outward wave. The heliopause quivered like a membrane under pressure. Even the solar wind, usually chaotic, feral, bent smoothly around the distortion, obeying a geometry it had forgotten it once knew. The echo from the void pulsed again, louder, clearer, stronger, a harmonic like a star struggling to breathe. Not light, not sound. Something deeper, like time flexing inward on itself for a single, shuddering moment. Probes stationed far beyond Pluto recorded numbers no instrument had been calibrated for. Random chants dropped to zero. Patterns bloomed inside the noise. Temperature fluctuations formed fractal curves. Quantum jitter straightened itself. Everything even slightly chaotic began falling into alignment with the frequency from the void. The dying fragment of the ancient architecture was stabilizing, because it could feel the Custodian. And it was reaching back. Inside Atlas, the spherical core expanded again, its layers sliding with impossible precision. Each movement altered the gravitational profile around the object, bending space into spiral wells that curled inward like petals around a dormant seed. Earth felt it instantly. People woke from sleep without knowing why. Animals fled inland. The oceans paused mid-current. The planet's magnetic field tightened, forming a narrow funnel pointed toward the aperture. Earth didn't want to participate. It had no choice. The network was stronger than the world it used as an anchor. The Custodian leaned toward the void. Structure unfolded. Thin, lattice-like threads that extended past the cocoon, past Atlas, past the orbit of Neptune, reaching for the echo like fingers brushing the edge of a once familiar hand. The void responded, trying to grasp back, trying to reconnect. But the architecture beyond the heliosphere was too far gone. The echo flickered, collapsed, reappeared, collapsed again. A pulse of sorrow, if such a thing can exist in physics, radiated inward, dimming the aperture. The dying network couldn't sustain itself. The Custodian responded with power. Its field surged outward, expanding so rapidly that planets scattered with temporary orbital misalignment. Jupiter's magnetosphere screamed with auroras. Saturn's rings vibrated like strings plucked by an unseen musician. Uranus tilted a fraction more than normal. Neptune's storms froze in place for 3 entire seconds. The solar system was being forced into full resonance. The sun brightened in a perfect spiral, 5 loops, each aligning with the coil inside Atlas. Earth echoed. The ghost node glowed. The aperture stabilized. The Custodian pushed harder, pouring energy into the void, trying to rebuild the missing structure. And then, the void answered with clarity. A shape emerged from the darkness. Not physical, not dimensional. A projection made of collapsed harmonics, like the memory of something too damaged to manifest fully. The shape flickered between forms, a ring, a helix, a lattice, a spiral, a star, a void. Its geometry rewrote itself in real time, choking on fragmentation, struggling to remember what it once was. Atlas's core responded with a gravitational tone that sent shockwaves through the dimensional cocoon and out into the solar system. Every probe that wasn't hardened went offline. Every satellite stuttered. Every instrument recorded data that looked like pure fiction. The shape steadied for a moment, and the Custodian reached toward it. A connection formed. The void and the solar system merged into a single harmonic for less than 1 second. But a single second was enough. Inside the echo, hidden in the dying architecture's final coherent breath, was information. Not language, not symbols, not sound. A memory. A memory of what the network used to be. A memory of why it fell. A memory of what the Custodian was rebuilding. A memory of what happens when the architecture awakens in a system unprepared for its purpose. The transfer hit the Custodian like a shockwave. Atlas convulsed inside the cocoon. The sun flared a blue-white arc across the corona. Earth trembled so violently that the mantle shifted a measurable fraction. The void collapsed. Not with an explosion. With a sigh. A soft implosion that folded the echo back into silence. The aperture dimmed. The pattern faded. The geometry unraveled. But the damage, or the awakening, was done. The Custodian had received the memory. and the memory contained a truth NASA would never have allowed the world to hear. The network was never meant to activate with only one star, and a single node awakening is catastrophic. The Custodian, trembling with the weight of the memory, turned its field downward, toward the sun, toward Atlas, toward Earth. Something new was unfolding, something vast, something irreversible. The memory revealed what Phase 7 would be, a step the original network only took when all nodes were online, when every star was synchronized, when the architecture was whole. But now it would be forced into a solar system too small, too fragile, too young, and too alive. Phase 7 would not just awaken the network. It would transform the entire solar system into something else, something humanity was never meant to witness. Phase 7 did not begin like the others. It did not echo through the sun. It did not shake Earth. It came quietly, so quietly that most of the solar system didn't understand what was happening until it was already too late. The Custodian stopped moving. Its field froze mid-extension, suspended between the collapsing echo of the ancient network and the struggling harmonics of the renewed solar system. For the first time, the entity inside Atlas seemed unsure, not malfunctioning, just calculating. The memory it had absorbed was too large, too old, too complex. A record carved into physics itself, carrying warnings older than star formation. Warnings about what a forced awakening would do. Warnings about what happens when a network activates with missing stars, missing nodes, missing mass. When a system too young and too chaotic tries to stand in place of a vanished architecture. Warnings about collapse, not destruction, not explosion. Dimensional collapse, the kind that folds systems into strange shapes, rewrites orbits, turns stars into mirrors, planets into amplifiers, moons into conduits. A collapse that transforms not through force, but through alignment. And Earth, alive, unpredictable, emotional Earth, was resonating like a perfect amplifier for a sequence that was never intended for biological worlds. The Custodian hesitated. In that hesitation, something terrifying happened. The solar system tried to complete Phase 7 on its own. The sun initiated a magnetic twist, one so deep that the convection zone stretched into a shape never before seen. Jupiter's magnetosphere spun faster. Earth's field intensified. The ghost node pulsed, trying to form structure out of memory alone. The solar system was acting like a system that remembered its old purpose, but remembering incorrectly, out of rhythm, out of phase, overloading itself. The Custodian moved instantly. Its field contracted, fast, violent, decisive, shutting down the harmonics radiating from the sun. The blue-white corona spiral snapped. The ghost node flickered. Earth's resonance dipped. For the first time in hours, the solar system stuttered, as if the pieces suddenly realized they were misaligned. But it was too late. The sun had already begun the first irreversible part of Phase 7. Inside the star, the tachocline folded, not outward, not inward, sideways. A dimensional shear, tiny, microscopic but unmistakable, tore through the magnetic skeleton like a whisper-slicing silk. Space cracked. Time thinned. The sun's internal oscillations split into two identical harmonics, the same way a reflection splits from its source in a mirror. The sun was trying to create a second node. It was trying to mirror itself. It was trying to replace the one that died. The Custodian responded with a force no human term could describe. Its field expanded to planetary scale in seconds. Not destructive, but absolute. A dimensional hand pressed gently but decisively against every surface, forcing the solar system down into silence. The sun quieted. Earth quieted. Even the ghost node dimmed. Only Atlas remained bright. The Custodian pulled the memory inward, compressing it into its core. The cocoon shimmered violently, threatening to rupture under the strain. Reality around it bent sharply, forming rings of distorted starlight that trembled like ripples on water. Atlas had become the bottleneck for an entire star's worth of ancient information. It could not contain this forever. Earth felt the pressure. Skies darkened for a moment. Birds fell silent. People across the world experienced a sudden tightening in their chest. Pure instinct, a reaction to something vast taking shape. The Custodian finally stopped compressing the memory, and then it chose. The solar system could not complete Phase 7. It could not mirror a missing star. It could not survive full activation. The Custodian changed the plan. It would not awaken the network. It would stabilize it, slightly, imperfectly, but enough to prevent dimensional collapse. The Custodian's field shifted for the first time with purpose, not reaction. A single pulse fired outward, long, slow, soft, measured. It crossed the solar system like a wave of warm breath. Every planet stilled, every field softened. The sun lowered its oscillation. Earth's mantle settled. The ghost node stopped flickering. The entire architecture exhaled. But the pulse didn't stop at the planets. It reached the aperture, the edge of the heliosphere, the dying echo, the collapsed architecture beyond, and it sealed the void, not shutting it violently, closing it gently, like a door being pulled shut on an old collapsing room of a house too dangerous to enter. The geometry smoothed. The distortion vanished. The cosmic microwave background returned to chaos. The ripple flattened. The aperture was gone. The Custodian had chosen survival over awakening, stability over completion, life over architecture. The solar system would not join the ancient web, not yet. Not with its missing stars, not with its broken nodes, not with its unstable biology. But the network wasn't gone, just paused, just dim, just slumbering. The Custodian began retracting its field, first from the ghost node, then from the sun, then from Earth. Earth's resonance loosened. The Schumann frequency drifted back toward normal. Clouds shifted. Animals resumed their migrations. Pressure softened. Normalcy returned, almost. Because the imprint remained. Earth was changed, slightly, permanently, as if the world had passed through a tuning fork and kept a faint unheard note in its bones. The Custodian collapsed its architecture inward. The spirals folded. The plates slid. The core dimmed. Atlas's cocoon unraveled. For the first time since its arrival, the object was visible again, small, simple, comet-like. A disguise, returned. But its internal geometry was different now, simpler, quieter, withdrawn. The Custodian was going back to sleep. Atlas drifted, weightless, silent, no longer pulsing, no longer correcting, no longer aligning. The ferrofluid-like sheath around the object detached, dissolving into vacuum. The sun resumed its natural turbulence. Earth settled. Jupiter's storms spun again. The solar system, shaken awake, began to forget, as if memory itself was being erased. But not completely, because Atlas didn't leave the solar system. It remained in a slow, drifting orbit, far from the sun, far from Earth, in a region where gravity is thin and quiet. A parking place, a waiting place. The Custodian wasn't abandoning its creation. It was watching over it, guarding it, waiting for the day when the network could awaken properly. A day when enough stars rekindle. A day when another Custodian answers. A day when the architecture can be rebuilt fully. A day when Earth will play a role it does not yet understand. Humanity would later call Atlas inactive, dormant, harmless. But the solved data says something different. The final timestamp, hidden in the core's last pulse, carried a message the analysts almost missed. Cycle incomplete, awaiting next star. It wasn't a warning. It wasn't a threat. It wasn't an ending. It was a promise. Atlas will awaken again when the next star sings the ancient harmonic, when the network stirs, when the architecture calls, and somewhere, deep in the vacuum between constellations, something answered once already.